Hey everybody, welcome back. Mike from Spectre Comics here. Today we finally got to the fourth and final video on our How to Draw Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles series. Today we're going to be drawing Raphael. We're going to kind of follow the same format we did for all the other turtles, but in addition to talking about how to draw the turtle and add it to part of the original composition we started with all four turtles. All the videos, by the way, will be linked in the description below, so go ahead and check the other turtle videos out if you haven't seen them. But we're also going to talk about the history of the Turtle comics. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to kind of go through the history way back in 1983 with the first printing of issue number 1 of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by Eastman and Laird. And then we're just going to go, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because the Turtles had a lot of different artists involved in their comics. And we're going to kind of talk about some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of that. And specifically one of the artists that drew the Turtles really influenced the way I draw my comics today, how I draw Spectre comics, and the way I compose, and I'll explain why as we get into this video. But right now, we're just going to set up the drawing the way we usually do. I'm going to half-tone the other turtles in the background. Again, we are creating a composition with all the turtles. So what I wanted to make sure we do is I wanted to be able to see where they were so I can kind of see where I'm drawing Raph and where he might cover up some of the other turtles. Again, I have them all in close proximity in an action scene, so the various poses are going to cover up. Raph's going to be in the foreground of this picture, so he's going to be covering up Dooney, Leo, and Mikey. So let's get into it. Again, same way I always do. We're going to do a quick skeleton pose to kind of outline the pose he's going to be in, and his weapon of choice is the sai, so we're going to use that as his weapon in this video. So while we get into the drawing of that, I'm just going to talk about going all the way back to 1983 again with the first printing of the first issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Very limited run, very valuable comic if you have a good quality copy of that original printing. Very valuable comic. The earliest comic I mentioned in the Michelangelo video that I have, the most valuable comic I have, is a first printing of issue number 4, which is in pretty good condition. It's not mint condition. But it's in pretty decent condition. There's no wrinkles or anything. It's pretty flat. But comics do age over time, so I don't have it like behind a glass case or anything. It's just in my comic box. Anyway, I want to go back to talking about the way Eastman and Laird did their comics. Was they started by doing the original drawing of the story, writing the stories, drawing the comics, inking, and they would have other artists that were kind of on the staff, helping out, doing lettering, inking, and some of the other ways. But they tended to bring on other artists over time to create turtle comics. And initially I would say they were involved heavily in the first 30 issues, and sometimes and you can very distinctly tell the Eastman and Laird art. But when they let other artists kind of take over and create their own turtle comic, in the sequence of issues, you could see a very big style change, and some were good and some were bad. And I kind of want to talk about the good and the bad of that, because in most cases, I don't like when there's inconsistent art in comics. Like, I started collecting the Ultimate Spider-Man original comic a couple years back, and I collected all of them. I thought they were really good. Brian Michael Bendis was the writer. Mark Bagley, did the drawings, the pencils, and there was a very great consistency between art of the comics. But then, once they got past issue 100, they brought on a new penciler, and all the characters looked different, and it just bothered me. So I kind of fell out of favor with the comic, and I stopped collecting it. That being said, the Turtles from almost the get-go had different artists being involved in the comics, and again, everybody had their different style, the way they drew comics. Issues basically 1 through 12 were pretty much all Eastman and Laird. You can tell their art style, you can tell their storytelling was very distinct. But then I think issue 13 brought on Michael Dooney, who was involved with the Turtle comics in some aspects too, whether it was drawing or inking. But he has his own style of the way he draws the Turtles, and he did issue number 13. I think he wrote and drew that comic, and it's got a very distinct style. And I bring him up because his specific turtle style was always what I envisioned the Turtles looking like. So I really took to his version of the Turtles, and I really liked it. There was issue 8, I believe. There was a cross issue with Cerebus, the aardvark Dave Sims' Cerebus, another indie comic that's very popular from back in the 80s. he did a guest star. I think Dave Sim actually drew in the comic. So the Eastman and Laird drew the Turtles, and Dave Sim drew Cerebus. So that was a cool little crossover issue. That was issue 8, I believe. But after issue 13, you started seeing Eastman and Laird kind of popping in and out. Sometimes it would be either Eastman or Laird kind of working with, one of the two would work with another artist. I think it was funny because back in those days, the comics, they weren't monthly. They would sometimes go 2 or 3 months without a comic coming out. So you'd go to the comic book store on the normal comic book issuance day, which I think was Tuesday, and there wouldn't be a new copy there once a month like you would normally expect, like a Marvel comic or another series, Batman, Spider-Man, whatever. You'd always depend on the comic being out every month on the same day every month. But Turtles sometimes go in 3 or 4 months without a new issue, and it was kind of irritating. But when you're an indie comic developer and artist and creator, it's hard to stick on a schedule because the comics, I know this from personal experience, comics take a long time, especially when you have a small staff. In the case for me, the small staff is one person. It's me doing everything with a full-time job on top of that. So it does take time to put this stuff together. But there was different combinations of artists. Eastman and Laird, there was artists like Eric Talbot, Jim Lawson, Steve Levine, Michael Dooney, a bunch of others. Again, I mentioned Dave Sims had the little crossover issue with Cerebus, issue number 8. Issue number 16, Mark Martin. He did a lot of other stuff like I think Nat Rat, and which was kind of a spoof of Batman, The Dark Knight. But he did a couple of Turtle issues, really wacky issues, a lot of time travel and just really odd storytelling, interesting and fun, but definitely a different direction for the Turtles. He did a couple of, he did a single issue. He did a couple of 2 series issues. But his art was interesting. And just to take a little detour on Mark Martin, when the very first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie came out, he created this spoof. I think it was right after the movie released. He released this spoof parody comic book of the movie, and it was called Green Gray Sponge Suit Sushi Turtles. And it was just funny. Like all the turtles had weird names like Viceroy and Velveeta, spelled funny, and all of their weapons were like Mr. Popale, Pocket Fisherman's and Clapper and Mr. Microphone, all inventions by Popale. Back in the 80s, if you're not familiar with those things. So it was just a really funny spoof of the comic. It was outrageous. It was in color because all the Turtles comics, Eastman and Laird comics, were black and white. It had a very painted kind of watercolor kind of style to it, but vivid colors, bright, and it was kind of funny. And then jumping up, there was another artist, Rick Veich, did issues 24, 25, and 26. He had very striking covers. He had all the 4 turtles, colorful background, action pose. It was a very dynamic color. It was attractive when you would see it. The one thing I noticed about Rick Veich's turtles were they all looked exactly the same. And I talked about this in my Donatello video, that I didn't want all my turtles to look the same. It's hard to, they're the same creatures, but they all have the same features. So I tried to change the head shapes of Donatello and all 4 turtles, so they look a little different. And I think the movies do a good job of trying to make each turtle look a little, distinct, whether it be by the decoration on their shells, the wraps, the chest plates, the wrappings on their hands. Rick Veich's turtles looked exactly the same, all 4 of them. The only difference is the weapons that they're holding. They're not even a slightly different color of green. But he had an interesting story. He had those three issues, and I think he did one other issue called Sky Highway, which is a really out there comic issue with Casey Jones. Another interesting version of the Turtles, starting with issue number 31, Michael Zulli created this very spiritual, dark and gritty turtle. Now, initially when I saw the comic, I didn't like it because the turtles looked really weird. They looked really like humanoid reptiles, like super muscular, but more in the tradition of Japanese, with robes and wrappings, but they didn't wear masks. But it was it was just like a lot of imagery. It was very dark. They used a lot of references, symbols. It was a very symbolic kind of comic. And the more I read that one over and over again, that series of 3 issues, I found it really interesting. But again, really big departure from, going back to the first couple of issues of the Turtles by Eastman and Laird, their art and storytelling. This was a big departure, but it was an interesting departure. I liked the series. Now let's compare that to Head and McSweeney with this really comedy, slapstick version of the Turtles. Did not like that. Not that I didn't like it. I thought it was funny, but as far as the Turtles go, that's more like of an Archie Comics kind of a thing. I didn't like that version of the Turtles. I just thought it was just too slapstick. It just felt inappropriate in the seriousness and the black and white comics of the original Turtle stories. And again, not to say I don't like that style, or of storytelling, but it just felt really busy and all over the place and crazy. And I know they were trying to be funny with it, but I just felt it was inappropriate for this Mirage line of Turtle comics. It bothered me way back in the day, but here in 2020, I'm over it, And then Richard Corbin created in issue number 3. Richard Corbin was the artist for a single issue. It was the first color issue in the Turtle series. It was called Turtles in Time, and it was one of my favorite issues, even though it was quite a departure. But the Turtles look cool. It was basically the Turtles getting by an unknown force getting sent back in time consistently, fighting pirates, fighting the Knights of the Round Table, going all the way back to the beginning of time, and then basically the beginning of creation. And then it was just an interesting story. I would recommend reading it if you have access to it. But that was a really cool issue. Let's get back to Michael Dooney, though. Michael Dooney, like I said, he's one of my favorite Turtle artists, and I got a little funny story about him, because I was in 2013. I went to Chicago Comic-Con. I can't remember if it was Wizard World or C2E2. It was probably Wizard World in Rosemont, and I was walking through Artist Alley with my wife and my friend, and I walked past this table, and it's, in Artist Alley said Michael Dooney, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's the guy from the Turtle comics. I wonder if this is the guy. And I was standing at his table in front of him, and I wanted to ask him, I'm like, is this you? And I wanted to pull up something on my phone. I had an iPhone at the time. I was trying to get the internet to work to load a cover of a comic that I knew he did. And I was standing in front of his table so long, not doing anything or saying anything, just looking at my phone, that I think I made him uncomfortable. And he got up and he walked away. And, being in a convention center, internet is not good there. It was very slow. And I finally pulled 10 minutes later, finally got an image to pop up on the screen. And then he finally came back. And I asked him, I'm like, did you do this? I said, I'm a big fan. I love your Turtle comics. And he did a series also called Gizmo. And then a crossover series with Eastman and Laird way back created this comic called Fugitoid, which crossed over with the original couple of issues of the Turtles, because they had this really long, weird, most people don't know this, but there's this weird turtle where they got zapped into space and were like, it was a really weird alien story where they kind of got zapped to another planet, and they come across this robot called the Fugitoid. And there was a single issue crossover called The Fugitoid. Well, Peter Laird and Michael Dooney created a 2-series issue called Gizmo and the Fugitoid, where Michael Dooney crossed over his Gizmo series with the Fugitoid. So it's all part of the same universe, apparently. And I loved the 2-series comic. I just thought it. I actually have a Fugitoid figure, which I keep on my desk. I've had this since the 80s. And I just loved that story. So I was a big fan of his. He not only did his, because he was set in outer space, and Spectre Comics obviously set in outer space as well. I used a lot of the way he drew things as a kind of an influence on how I drew things. How he drew outer space scenes and how he drew ships and how he drew environments on different planets, because part of the Gizmo series was him going to different planets. He had a ship, and the ship had a personality and had a Kit from Knight Rider who could talk to him, and it was just a really cool series. So he was a strong influence on my art, even to today. I always, whenever I want to know how to draw, how he would draw something, and so I can draw it that way, I go and I pull out the old comics from Michael Dooney, and I kind of see how did he do this. Anyway, that was it. That's basically and just to kind of finish the story of the Turtle comics, you know, over the years, they had many different other artists. And as we got into the 40s and 50s of the comic issues, I started collecting them less. I was in college at the time. I actually started not collecting comics as much, but I really started not liking the art and the stories of the original comic series. So I still hold high regard for the original, let's say the first, 45 issues of the original Turtle comics. Still have them today. I'll pull them out every once in a while and read them. But that is it. And then just to get back to the drawing of Raphael, again, I didn't go into a lot of explanation because we covered, it would be me just saying the same thing I said in the last 3 videos. But here is the final composition of all 4 turtles. Pretty pleased with the way this turned out. Hope you enjoyed following along. Like the video if you liked not only the turtle drawing for Raphael, but also just kind of a little history of the original comics and kind of my commentary on it. And that's about it. So again, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to do a full color, not necessarily color tutorial, maybe a speed paint. And I'll talk more about turtles and maybe a little bit about how to color or how I color Photoshop. I actually have a lot to learn. I just have a certain way I do it, and I'll share that method with you. But I'm also taking an online course on how to digitally paint better. So maybe I'll use some of the techniques there, and we'll do it together. So again, subscribe to the channel, like the video. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.